Hi, I'm Dr. Mark Leary, and after 40 years of teaching college and university students, and 40 years of advising them about how to apply to graduate schools, I want to talk about a few topics that continually come up as students prepare to think about graduate school. The first thing that happens every fall when students start thinking, particularly seniors, start thinking about applying to graduate schools, is they suddenly realize that this process is a lot more complicated and overwhelming than they imagined. It takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of thought, there's a lot of information you have to process, and some of it's not perfectly clear, even what the words mean, when you start hearing about different programs. And so I want to give you some guidance in how to think about this whole process and give you some terminology to help you process the information more easily. Part of the problem is that there are 185 departments in the United States alone, not counting overseas, that grant PhDs in psychology. And there are hundreds of other programs that grant master's degrees in various areas. So that's a lot of information in and of itself to start thinking about which of these hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of schools might I want to go to. And that decision is complicated by the fact that every one of those departments, or most of them, have multiple programs in different content areas. For example, our PhD program here at Duke has 6 different program areas. So students have to decide, what area of psychology do I really want to go into? Do I want to go into clinical psychology, or social, or developmental, or cognitive, or some area of neuroscience, or family relations, or marital therapy? And the number of areas in psychology to go into is just gigantic. So you got to figure that out. You'll also find, as you start reading about various programs, that depending on what you're interested in, you might find it outside of departments of psychology. There are departments of social work in which you're providing psychological services. There are departments of family studies, gerontology, and counseling, and other fields, education, that are very psychological, and they may actually lead you in the direction you want to go more than a mainline psychology department. So you've got to consider those as well. And I'm sure you've already begun to think about, how should I pace my higher education? What schedule should I be on? Should I go to graduate school right after I leave Duke? Take off a year, 2 years, 3 years? What do I do in that time? Just get a job? Do I need to get a job in the field in which I want to go? Does it need to be a research job? Does it need to be an applied job? Can I just go and wander Europe for 2 years? Does anybody care? There's a lot of variety there, and I wouldn't worry too much about what you do if you take off some time. What you really would like to do, if you could though, is to work in a field where you are convincing yourself that you're going in the right direction, so that you can convince the admissions committee in a graduate program that you have explored the field you want to go into and you know something about it. Again, whether that's research or whether that's practice. And along the way, you need to give some thought to whether you really would like to have a PhD or a master's degree. Now, I realize most Duke students naturally gravitate and start thinking about a doctoral degree. You're high-achieving people, and that's a high achievement. But depending on what it is you want to do, you may not need a PhD. And if you don't need to devote 5 to 7 years to further education, and 2 years in a master's program will do the trick, then think seriously about whether a PhD is really for you. That's what I really want to talk about for starters, is comparing PhD to master's programs. If we ask the question, what do people with graduate degrees in psychology and related fields do? We say for people getting a doctorate, what do? Well, they really do one of 4 things, assuming they stay in the field and don't go out and start working at McDonald's. They do one of 4 things. They do research, either full-time as a PhD level researcher at a research institute, or working for business, or working for the government, or educational systems. Or they can be doing research as part of their job as a faculty member. They teach in colleges and universities. If they have an applied degree in clinical, or counseling, or organizational, or school psychology, they practice. And many PhDs in psychology consult in some very specialized area, maybe organizational behavior, or human resources, or something like that. So what do people do with a master's degree? to do the same four things. There are plenty of people with master's degrees in psychology who work in research, full-time researchers, again, in research institutes, universities, government, nonprofits, educational settings, justice settings. A lot of research being done by people with masters in research in psychology. You can teach with a master's degree, typically in small colleges and community colleges. If you have an applied master's degree, again, in clinical, counseling, school, or organizational psychology, you can practice with that degree, and there are certainly people who consult. So you can be engaged in the same sorts of activities on a daily basis, whether you have a doctorate or a master's degree. Well then, why would anybody get a doctorate? A couple of reasons. One is the people in charge of these places where you're working almost certainly have doctorate degrees. In mental health centers, for example, you often have 1 or 2 PhDs in clinical psychology, and then a staff of 12 or 15 master's level practitioners working under them. So the people in charge of the research or the practice or the teaching are likely to have PhDs. There are, of course, some differences in salary, not as much as you might expect. And there are certainly some master's level people who make more money than the PhDs do. So I wouldn't put too much weight on that, but in general, having a higher level degree earns you a little bit more money along the way. But if you don't need the PhD, if you don't need all 5, 6, or 7 years of extra education, maybe more in some places, then just ask yourself whether it's really worth it. One thing that people with a master's degree sometimes do, that you probably haven't quite thought about this way, is they go on to get a PhD. And that's one good reason to get a master's degree in some cases. So let me talk about master's degrees in a little bit more detail and give you some terminology for thinking about what you might be able to do with a master's degree. There are 2 types of master's degrees, and you'll see these listed in the guides and the websites you go to look at programs. One is called a non-terminal master's degree. This is a master's degree that a PhD student gets on the way to obtaining their PhD. So if you came into Duke's PhD program, for example, after a couple of years, if you wanted to, you could complete some requirements and get your master's degree along the way. But you would never apply to a program to get a non-terminal degree, because the only people who get them are the people who are in the PhD program who get them along the way. So when you see non-terminal, that means you can't apply to this program. It's really a doctoral program in which one stepping stone toward the doctorate is to get your master's degree. And then there are terminal degrees, which always seem like kind of a sad word to me, where your program ends with the master's degree. That is, you are admitted to a master's degree program, you spend a year or 2 years, sometimes 3 years, get your master's degree, and then you're through with that program. That doesn't mean you can't move on to a doctoral program elsewhere, and I'm going to talk about that in just a moment, but it means for the purposes of that program, your degree is finished. People often ask, is there any difference in a Master of Arts and a Master of Science? There's sort of the stereotype, Master of Science, that sounds more scientific and important somehow. There's no difference whatsoever. Different schools have different degree names that are just historical accidents. Doesn't matter at all. So pay no attention to whether a program has a Master of Arts or a Master of Science. So we have these non-terminal master's degrees, which are of no interest to you right now because you can't apply to those programs anyway. You'll just accidentally get one while you're working on your PhD. And then you have these terminal masters. All right, to make things even more complicated, I told you there's lots of terminology here. There are 2 distinct types of terminal master's programs. One of them is the applied terminal masters. These are areas in which people plan to practice with a master's degree. And in psychology, there are really 4 areas where you can practice with a master's: clinical, counseling, school, and organizational psychology. Go to an applied master's. When you get through, you can be licensed, certified, depends on what state you live in, what the rules are, but then you can practice. You can work with people with psychological problems. You can work helping organizations. There's a second kind of master's program, though, that is not applied, that is not preparing you to go practice psychology. It goes by a number of names. Generally, it's called a general master's program. Sometimes you will hear it called an experimental master's program, which I don't particularly like that term. And the people who go to these programs are going there for one of two reasons, and these may fit for some of you. One reason people go to general master's programs is that they're interested in a research position, but they're interested in doing research with a master's degree. They like research, they want to be involved in a research setting, but they don't want a PhD, they don't need it. You can go to a general master's program, spend 2 years doing advanced graduate study, learning more about research, getting more research experience, getting more sophisticated statistics courses, and then go out on the job market as a master's level researcher. And there are thousands of people out there doing that in universities, research institutes, government, educational settings, and business. The second thing, and this is more relevant to almost all of you, is that if you are applying to PhD programs in any area of psychology, general master's programs are great preparation, and they increase your chances of getting into a doctoral program. Now, in general, if you know exactly what kind of a doctoral program you would like to go into, and you're certain you have the credentials to get in terms of your GRE scores and your research experience and your grades and your letters of recommendation, well then there's no real need perhaps to go to a general master's program. But if you're someone whose record is a little spotty, where you may not get into a doctoral program, they're highly competitive. There are doctoral programs where they'll have somewhere, they get 120 applicants and they're going to take 3. Or in clinical programs, they have 300 to 500 applicants and they're going to take a dozen. They're highly competitive. And if your record isn't quite up to that yet, one thing you could do is get a general master's degree, get 2 years of graduate study, more research experience, more background, and most importantly, show the PhD admissions committees that you can handle graduate level work in psychology. I've known students who coming out of undergraduate school did not get into any PhD programs. Instead, they went to a general master's program, built their skills, built their credentials, and then got into PhD programs relatively easily. So I really recommend for most of you applying to PhD programs, you're going to apply to a lot. Your advisor will help you decide how many PhD programs to apply to, 8, 10, 12, it's not unusual. Apply to 2 or 3 general master's programs as backup. If you don't get into a PhD program, spend a couple of years in a master's program, and then you're more likely to get into the kind of doctoral program you'd like to get into. But here's something to keep in mind. And this is confusing not only to students, but to students' parents. The best master's programs in general psychology, probably in applied psychology too, but I know in general psychology, the best master's programs are at institutions that don't have doctoral programs. That means they're not at institutions that you think of as major universities, major research universities. Duke does not have a terminal general master's degree. Why? Because programs with doctoral students devote their resources and time to the PhD program. And master's students, even if there is a master's program, a terminal master's program in a PhD department, they're second-class citizens. They don't get the attention from faculty that you would get in a program without a doctoral program. What that means, and again, you have to get your head around this, and you probably have to convince your mom and dad to get their head around this, it's not going to be what you consider to be an elite research institution. It's just not. So, for example, in the eastern United States, if I had one of my kids was going to a general master's program, where would I tell them to go? My first choice would be Wake Forest University, just down the road here. They don't have a PhD program. They have one of the top 3 general master's program, and they've been specializing for 50 years in getting people into PhD programs. Villanova is a fine program. College of William and Mary. University of North Carolina at Wilmington has a fantastic general master's program that places people into PhD programs all the time. Now, those aren't the kinds of programs you normally think about applying to, right? The students don't think about that, and mom and dad don't think about that. I had some parents of a student who said to their kid, I didn't send you to Duke to go to William and Mary for your graduate program. But those are fine schools. Honestly, the best master's programs are at institutions without doctoral programs. Students always want to know, if I go this route, if I go get a general master's degree and then later on apply for a doctoral degree, do my courses transfer? Or do I lose all of that? I'm just spending a couple of years in a master's program to get into a doctoral program, but it doesn't gain me anything. It really depends on the doctoral program. Some give you credit for everything you took in your master's program. Some don't give you a bit of credit. In some ways it doesn't matter for this reason. The number of hours required in a PhD program is very, very small. The number of course hours. At Duke it's like 12 hours. So what are you doing for 5 years in a doctoral program? At 12 hours, you're doing research, you're teaching, you're involved in developing your skills. You're taking courses too, but you don't have to worry about that your courses don't transfer. You're going to have to take certain courses in a doctoral program and they will help you fulfill the requirement. You're not going to be working overtime, I guess is what I'm saying. All right, well that's just an introduction. Let me give you one piece of advice. The first thing, if you haven't done this, that you need to do if you're seriously considering applying to graduate school is to get your hand on either the published or the online version of this. It's the Graduate Study in Psychology Guide put out by the American Psychological Association. There is a printed version, it's like a big catalog, and it contains every graduate program in the United States and Canada. And for every one of those programs, it tells the fields that are represented in that program. It tells you the size of the faculty, the requirements for admission. You can see how competitive it is. It'll show how many people applied last year, how many got in, how long it takes the average student to get through, what financial support looks like, the orientation to the department. Everything you need to know to at least say, yes, this is a possibility, or no, it's not. Then with that information, then go online and go to their sites, and you'll get a lot more information. But this is a great place to start. There's a new online version just in the last few years where, I can't remember what the cost is, it's not much, $29 I think, to have access to a database of all of this information. So these, whether you get the printed version or the online version, contains all of the information that you need. And hopefully this shows up at the bottom of the screen. This is the web address where you can order either the printed or the version or the online version. Oh, right there. Good luck. This is complex and it's overwhelming. Get an early start now, consult with people, find one or two or more faculty members who will help give you guidance, and good luck. Having done this for 40 years now, it was a great choice, it's a great career, get into psychology, that's wonderful, but it is kind of a pain in the butt to get started. Good luck.